everyone, it's Michelle here. Welcome back to Grounded Haven Homestead. I've got another video of pantry challenge meals, and for this video I'm going to be showing you some of the dinners that we had throughout the week. For the first half of the week I was still just using whatever we had in our pantry without going to the store, but halfway through the week we did do a grocery store pantry restock, which is our first time going to the store in over a month. So a little bit later in the week there will be some fresh ingredients, but my goal is still to use mostly ingredients that we have in our pantry and as much homegrown and home preserved stuff as possible. Here's what I pulled out to work with this week, so I'll just go over it really quickly. I have another dozen eggs from our chickens. From the freezer, I have some yard-long beans. We've been going through our regular green beans pretty quickly, but I still have a lot of these, so I want to concentrate on using those. I also have a bag of pumpkin puree. I'm not sure quite yet what I'm going to be doing with this. I'm either going to be doing a pumpkin chili or pumpkin mac and cheese. And also from the freezer, I have another quart of winter melon. We've been going through this stuff pretty quickly. And I also have a container of cooked white beans. I think I cooked these up a while ago, so I want to use those up. Then from the fridge, I also have just a tiny bit left of kimchi left. This is from 2020 actually. So this is our older batch, and then we have another batch from 2021 that I can dig into if I need more. From our pantry, I found this jar of sweet sticky rice. And I just want to use up that last bit that we have left. And then I also have black beans and farro, or farro, I don't know how you would normally pronounce that. This is also known as emmer wheat. Before I get into the meals for the week, I'm going to be prepping some of these ingredients because I find it easier just to do it up front in the beginning of the week, especially with some of these things that take a little bit longer to cook. So first I'm going to be prepping and cooking up my farro. I'm taking 4 to 5 cups of this and I'm going to be rinsing this. If you've never had farro before, it is a nutritious whole grain, and this is what it looks like before it's cooked. And after it cooks, it becomes these nice plump grains like you can see here, and they have a pretty nutty taste and a nice chew to them. I'm going to be cooking this in my Instant Pot because it's going to make quick work of this. On the stovetop, this would probably take 30 to 40 minutes to cook, but in the Instant Pot, it's going to cook for 10 minutes. And I'm going to throw in a couple of bay leaves for some extra flavor. And I'm also going to be adding salt. I have an herb salt here. This has a mix of rosemary, sage, and thyme, I believe. So this is also just going to add some nice flavor, and I'm putting about 2 tablespoons in there. You kind of cook farro like pasta, so I'm going to be covering this up with plenty of water. I think anywhere between 8 to 10 cups of water total. And after this is done cooking, we're going to drain any of that excess water, so you don't have to worry about there being too much. So this is going to go in the Instant Pot on high pressure for 10 minutes. And anytime I'm taking out my Instant Pot to be cooking something, I try and cook multiple things at once. That way I don't have to clean all the parts multiple times. So after I'm done cooking my farro, I'm going to be cooking some black beans, and these are not soaked overnight, but while the farro is cooking, I might as well just let them soak for at least like 20 minutes or however long it takes, just to help speed up the process a little bit more and help them cook a little more evenly. And then I'm also going to boil my eggs as well. I have my 12 eggs and I'm going to be soft boiling these. Some of these I'm going to use for meals throughout the week, but I also just like to do this to have some quick snacks to have on hand. I like to have these after my workouts. It's just a nice little easy protein snack. And I thought while I was waiting for all this, I would whip up a baked oatmeal as well because I had some ingredients I needed to use up. I had a couple of egg whites and I also added 2 whole eggs. And I have some evaporated milk that I had used for another baking recipe this week, and I needed to use the rest of that up. So I put that in there, and it's good I had this because I don't have any milk left in the house after a month of this pantry challenge. And to this, I'm also going to add about a 1/4 cup of sugar to sweeten this mixture up a little bit. And then I'm going to be adding old-fashioned oats until I feel like it's the right consistency. I'm not measuring here and kind of just eyeballing it. I originally was not going to make this recipe for this video because I was going to stick to like dinners and lunches, but I had extra time while everything was cooking, so I figured I might as well just whip this up. This is a nice thing to make ahead of time because I don't need to bake this now. I can just put it into my baking dish and cover it and keep it in the fridge until I'm ready to bake it. So it's a really nice thing to just make ahead for an easy thing for the next morning or another morning this week. So I just mix that all up, and I'm also going to be adding a little bit of cinnamon for extra flavor, and I also have some strawberry chia jam. This is my like low sugar way of making jam, and I had a few jars of this in the freezer. I have a video for how to make this if you want to check that out, and I'm just going to top this on top of my oatmeal mixture. After I cooked this the next day, I did realize that my mixture was a little too dry, so I should have added a little bit more milk or added fewer oats, but that's okay, it still turned out all right, and I just served this along with some applesauce or maple syrup just to add a little bit of moisture back to it. So anyway, I'm just topping that jam on top, just doing little dollops. This is a great way to use up any like jams or preserves that you have. And I'm gonna cover this, and the next morning I can bake it at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes. And it was just a really quick, easy breakfast. So now back to that meal prep. My eggs have finished cooking as well as my farro. The farro I have drained, and before I portion it out, I am just leaving it in my colander so that it can cool down a little bit, because I'm going to be putting this in Ziploc bags and freezing some of this, and I don't want a lot of excess heat or moisture. So while those are cooling down, I'm going to prepare my eggs. I have some extra marinade from the tea eggs that I made last week, so I'm going to go ahead and stick some of these eggs in there so that I can have a nice tea egg snack. And I'm gonna do about 5 or 6 in this container because that's all I can fit in there before it starts overflowing. And then for the rest of them, I can just peel them to have as soft boiled eggs for the week. And if you missed the tea egg recipe, it was in my last pantry challenge video where I did breakfast and snacks, so you can check out the recipe there. And the last thing I need to prep for the week are those black beans. And even though these have only been soaking for like 20 to 30 minutes, they've already soaked up a lot of that water, which is really great. And I threw in a couple of bay leaves just because I already had them out. And I'm going to be adding about a tablespoon of this herbed salt. And I'm also adding a couple of my arroz con pollo peppers for extra flavor. And these were just straight from the freezer. So I'm gonna add some more water to this again to make sure that these beans have enough water to cook in. And these are going to cook in the Instant Pot for, I'm gonna do 20 minutes this time. I usually do like 22 to 23 minutes, but since these had a quick soak, I'm just gonna do them a little bit less. I wasn't even sure at this point if I was going to use those black beans or not this week, but you know what? I had my Instant Pot out. If I had to clean the whole thing, I might as well cook up some black beans, and I could stick all of the beans in the freezer for next time if I needed to. We go through black beans so quickly that it's always nice to have them on hand. And once everything is done cooking, this farro has cooled down. I'm going to portion this out into some Ziploc bags after saving some for the week. This is just because I cooked up so much and I knew that I didn't need all of this for this week. I probably only need like 2 to 3 cups for the week, but I wanted to go ahead and cook up a bunch of extra because I can just portion this out into these bags. And farro is something that I usually don't need a lot of. I only need like a couple of cups every time I want to use it to throw it into a soup or a salad or something like that. And it's just something that I'm not going to pull out to cook a couple of cups of, just because it does take a long time, or I don't want to pull out my Instant Pot for a small batch. So this is going to be something that I'm going to stick in the freezer, and it's going to be really good to have on hand because it's already cooked and all I have to do is defrost it and throw it into whatever recipe I'm making. And I think that having this pre-cooked is going to help me use this up a lot more. Usually I would gravitate towards cooking white rice because it is faster. I can throw it in my rice cooker and make smaller batches. But with these already cooked up, it's going to be a really nice way for me to incorporate some more nutritious whole grains into our diet. And here's my container that I'm going to set aside for the week, and the rest is going to go in the freezer. And when my black beans were done, I portioned those out into containers too. And again, I'm going to keep one of these in the fridge for this week, and the other two can go in the freezer for another time. Now with the meal prep done, we can move on to the actual meals. So the first one is going to be a Tuscan farro and bean soup. I have my white beans that are still a little bit frozen, and I'm just throwing them in my pot. I didn't have any onions left in the house, so I'm using some dehydrated leeks. These are homegrown. And I'm also going to throw in about a cup of my cooked farro. Normally when I'm making soups, I would saute up a lot of fresh veggies first to build a lot of flavor, but I just don't have a lot of fresh veggies right now, so I'm doing an easy soup and just throwing everything into the pot. I also have a jar of diced tomatoes from the garden, and I always love digging into one of these because it just smells and tastes like summer, and those tomatoes taste just as fresh as the day we picked them. And then for more liquid, I have some chicken bone broth. This broth was so good. It was from one of our own chickens that we raised this year, and I think it's seriously the best broth I have ever made. I also added some frozen greens. I usually just do a mix of greens, so I'm not really sure what these are. It's probably a mix of kale, chard, collards. I usually just mix them all together when I blanch and freeze my greens. And that is pretty much everything that's going to go in the soup. It's full of good homegrown veggies, and I also decided to make some garlic knots to go along with the soup. So I whipped up a pretty simple pizza dough. The only thing I added was a little bit of garlic powder in there and also some dried Italian herbs for some extra flavor. And I'm only gonna use half of this dough, so the other half I can save for some pizza for the week. So portioning out half of this dough, I am creating some ropes and just dividing this off into smaller pieces so that I can roll those out and create some knot shapes for our garlic knots. I like to cook my garlic knots in a cast iron pan, and I'll place them pretty close together. Right now they're not touching, but after these rest for 30 to 40 more minutes and they puff up, I do like them to be touching because then they become almost like pull apart garlic knots, and I prefer that to separate garlic knots. I think that they turn out a lot softer because having those garlic knots all up next to each other just keeps them really moist. So that's just how I prefer to cook them, and then the cast iron gives you a really nice crunchy crust at the bottom as well. So after I shape all of these, I'm going to cover it with a towel, let those rest for 30 minutes until they puff up. Towards the end of the rising time, I can preheat my oven to 400 degrees. And then I'm going to top these knots with a garlic butter mixture. I have some melted butter with some minced garlic in here. And to this, I'm also going to add some dried oregano. This is oregano from the garden this year. I'm just gonna crumble it up in my fingers and add it to this butter mixture. You can also use mixed Italian herbs. And I'm just going to spoon this over my garlic knots, trying to get into all of those nooks and crannies so that there is plenty of flavor locked in there. You can also do this with a pastry brush to get a more even coating. I just didn't feel like dirtying up a pastry brush, so I'm just using the spoon that I used to mix everything up. As a little bit of an extra touch, I also decided to top this with some grated cheese. I have this aged cheddar cheese that is pretty dry and crumbly, so I thought that this would be good to use. Normally you would use like a Parmesan, which has a really sharp flavor and it's very dry and easy to grate, but this cheddar is pretty dry as well, so I grated it up on my microplane, and this is going to turn these garlic knots into cheesy garlic knots. These are going to bake in that 400-degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes until they are nicely golden brown, and this is what they look like when they're done. And I promise you, if you make garlic knots, your house is going to smell incredible as well. I pulled out a jar of tomato sauce to dip our garlic knots into, kind of like how you would get a marinara sauce at a pizzeria. This tomato sauce is a little bit on the thin side, but that's okay, it's going to be great for dipping. And the soup is now done. I just finished it off with some fresh squeezed lemon, a drizzle of olive oil to add some more richness, and also some freshly cracked black pepper. And I also added some diced sweet potatoes while it was cooking, just because I remembered I had some of that in my fridge that I wanted to use up. And this soup turned out so much better than I thought it would. I mean, I knew it was going to be good, but since it is a lot of like vegetables and beans, at first I thought it was going to be maybe like a little bit bland and boring, but I think that homemade bone broth really did it. It just tasted so rich, and it was just very hearty and very healthy as well, with all of those vegetables packed in there and that whole grain farro. And it was perfect to go along with our garlic knots on the side. I was trying to get a shot of the garlic knots and the texture inside, but they were so hot that I was just trying not to burn myself, honestly. But I promise you, those garlic knots were really good. They were super fluffy inside and very crispy on the outside and on the bottom from the cast iron. And sorry, this is the best shot I could get without burning my fingers off, but you guys get the point. For the next meal, I'm going to be using up that jar of sticky rice, and I've prepped some ingredients. I have some dried shiitake mushrooms and also some dried shrimp, both of which I've soaked in some warm water for 30 minutes. These are ingredients that you could normally get at an Asian grocery store, and they are pantry staples for me. The dried shiitake mushrooms can stay on your pantry indefinitely, and the dried shrimp I usually keep in the fridge, but I believe these are shelf stable as well. I also have a couple of Chinese sausages. These are ones that I made with my parents, but you can also get this at an Asian store, or I think that a lot of Costco's also sell this as well, so you can check there. And I'm just gonna prep all these ingredients by dicing them up really small. And what I'm making here today is kind of like a sticky rice version of a fried rice. And it's something that you would get a lot for dim sum, and it's just a dish that I like a lot. It's very comforting and savory and has lots of umami flavors and nice textures in there. So anyway, I'm gonna prep up these ingredients by dicing them up, trying to get everything into nice tiny bite-sized pieces. The shiitake mushrooms soak up a lot of water when they're soaking, so I just squeeze out all of that excess water, and we are going to be using some of that. It's full of flavor, so just put that aside and save that, don't pour it out. And then for these, I like to just take off the really tough part of the stems that are a little too tough to eat. You can stick these into like a bag in your freezer if you usually keep one for making vegetable broth. That's what I usually do, and these will add some nice flavor to your broth. And then I'm just going to thinly slice these and again dice them up really small. It was really nice that I had found that jar of sticky rice and decided to use it this week, because this week was actually the week of Lunar New Year, so it was really nice to add another Chinese dish that I grew up eating, because I was making lots of different Chinese recipes that week just to have our own little celebration at home since we weren't with my family this year for Chinese New Year. I also pulled out some green onion tops. These are the tops of like regular onions that I grew last year, and since I don't have scallions in my house right now, I'm going to be using this as kind of like the scallion flavored element. So I'm taking these straight from the freezer and just chopping it up into smaller pieces, and those are all of like the filling ingredients that we're gonna need. So here are the finished ingredients. We have our green onions, our Chinese sausage, shiitake mushrooms, and dried shrimp. So I'm going to saute everything up in a pan besides the green onions, which we'll add at the end. And I'm just trying to develop some nice browning on these ingredients and just to cook them out a little bit. While those are cooking in the pan, I'm going to stir up the sauce that's going to go on the rice. I have some oyster sauce, which I'm going to use about a tablespoon of. Then I have some light soy sauce, which I'm going to use a teaspoon or two of, and then about half a teaspoon of dark soy sauce, which is going to give it a really nice color. Also about a half teaspoon of sesame oil. And then I'm going to take some of that shiitake mushroom water, maybe about a tablespoon or so, just to help thin out this sauce and add a little bit extra mushroom flavor into the dish. Once everything in my pan has browned nicely, you can see a little bit of caramelization going on here. I'm going to turn off the heat and add in my sauce, and it's going to thicken a little bit, so I just take it off the heat if it's getting a little bit too thick. And then lastly, we're going to add in our green onions and mix those all in. And meanwhile, my sticky rice has been cooking in my rice cooker, and I'm just going to throw all of the ingredients in my pan right into my rice cooker insert, and I can just mix it up all in here, which makes it super easy. And when everything is all mixed up, this is what it looks like. This is one of my favorite comfort meals. It is so full of savory flavors, and I served this along with some winter melon soup. This is just winter melon boiled in some chicken broth, and it's simple but so good and such a good side dish for a rice dish like this. So a quick little interruption before I move on with the rest of the meals for this pantry challenge. At this point in the week, we actually did go out to the grocery store for the first time in like over a month to grab a few things, because even though this is a pantry challenge, I am allowing us to go and get some food, especially since we went over a month without going to the grocery store. I think that's pretty good. I picked up some fresh salad greens, some mushrooms, a bag of onions, and also some milk and cheese, along with some other things that I didn't show here. But it was just really good to get some fresh things back into the pantry, and I am going to try to go the rest of February without going to the store again, so hopefully this will get us through. But anyway, if you see some new fresh veggies in these next few recipes, that is why. So finally I have onions again in the house, so I'm dicing up some of those along with some of those mushrooms that I bought, and I'm going to be making a kimchi fried farro. So again, this is like a take on fried rice, but this time instead of using white rice like I normally would, I'm using farro, which is more nutritious. And I'm also using up that rest of my older batch of kimchi as well. And having these onions and mushrooms will be a nice welcome addition. So I'm just dicing these up into small pieces, and then I'm going to saute these up in a pan.
And then I turn around for 1 second, I turn back around, she's over there looking at the light. And then sure enough, and I was like, oh my god, you guys can't help yourselves.
They're just like the cats, they're so curious.
It's so funny.
While those vegetables are cooking, I'm going to put together a salad dressing to go with those fresh salad greens, and I am so excited to have salad again. We have not had like a nice huge fresh salad in so long, and to go with my kimchi fried farro, I am making a salad dressing that you often get at Korean restaurants. I'm starting off with a little bit of minced garlic along with some soy sauce and rice vinegar, and then I'm going to add some sesame oil, and then also some gochugaru, which is Korean red pepper flakes. Oh, and I also am putting in a little bit of sugar. This just helps to give it a little bit of sweetness. So this is like a salty, spicy salad dressing. It seems kind of weird at first to put soy sauce in a salad dressing, but it is really good, and it's just a really easy salad dressing to whip up as well. I'm also adding some very thinly sliced onions along with some carrots and some watermelon radishes from the garden. This is going to give it a little bit of an extra spicy kick from the onions, and then some extra crunch as well. And then I can add in the salad greens and just mix it all up. I typically am not much of a salad person, but after a month of eating pantry greens and vegetables, I have to say a fresh salad is just what you need, and I've never been more excited for a salad in my life. I'm also going to chop up my kimchi into smaller pieces. When I make my kimchi, they're in larger chunks, but when I go to cook them, we like them to be really nice and shredded so that they get incorporated into what we're cooking a little bit better. So I'm going to add these to the pan and fry them a little bit. Since this kimchi is pretty old, it has a really strong fermented and funky flavor. It is honestly too strong for us to eat fresh, so cooking it takes away some of that kind of funk a little bit and makes it a little bit more palatable, especially for Aaron because he's not a huge fan of kimchi. So after that's been frying off a little bit, I'm going to add the rest of my farro along with the rest of that kimchi liquid. It has tons of probiotic benefits and flavor in there, so we don't want to waste that. And I'm also going to add a little bit of soy sauce and sesame oil just to season this up a little bit more. This is going to be topped with one of those eggs that I prepared earlier in the week. So I'm cutting each of these in half. These turned out to be more of a medium boiled. I really wanted it to be like a jammy egg, but this will work just fine. A fried egg would also be really good on top of this. So here's the finished meal. I have the kimchi fried farro along with those eggs. I also added some pea microgreens on the side. We have our salad with that Korean salad dressing, and I also had some leftover fish that I cooked up the other day, since we were able to get fresh fish from when we went to the grocery store, and we haven't been able to have fresh fish in over a month, so that was definitely a really nice treat. For the last meal for this week, I decided to go for the pumpkin chili over the pumpkin mac and cheese. So in a pot, I have some diced onion in here that I'm going to saute. I also added some garlic to this. And since I don't have any bell peppers, fresh or frozen, I am going to be using some of my cowboy candy, which are candied pickled jalapenos. I'm just using a little bit here because I'm afraid it's going to be too spicy if I use too much. And this is going to add a little bit of a spice, but also have a little bit of like that bell pepper flavor. And then I'm going to be using this plant-based ground beef. Obviously, normal ground beef or ground turkey would be great in this. I just don't have any in our house right now, so I'm going to be using this plant-based version. It doesn't have like the same rich flavor of an actual meat, but it does add a lot of that same texture that we really like in a chili. For seasoning, I am going to be adding some chili powder. I'm using 1 or 2 tablespoons of that. I also have a couple of tablespoons of tomato paste, which I'm going to saute to get a little bit of that tinny flavor out and give it a little bit more depth before I go in with the rest of the ingredients. Next, I'm going to add a jar of diced tomatoes from the garden. Then I'm going to add a whole container of those black beans that I cooked earlier this week. And just topping this off with some vegetable broth to get a little bit more liquid in there. This turned out to be like an all vegetarian chili, which I didn't fully plan on, but that's all good with us. And then, of course, we have our pumpkin puree. I'm going to add the whole bag in here. Pumpkin chili is a really nice variation on a normal chili if you're looking to just switch things up a little bit. It doesn't have an overly strong flavor. It has a really nice light sweetness that we're going to play up with some extra spices in a little bit. And it also just helps to thicken up the chili really nicely. And to differentiate this from a normal chili, we're going to add a few other flavorings. I'm adding a little bit of cinnamon and also some freshly grated nutmeg. These are flavors that are typically used in sweet dishes, but they actually work really nice here with the pumpkin, and it just gives it a really nice warmth. I also added some dried sage in here because sage and pumpkin just go so well together. This just has to simmer for a little bit to let all of those flavors melt together. At the very end, before serving, I'm going to add in some frozen corn. I like to save this for the end to keep a lot of that fresh sweet corn flavor because I don't want it to all get cooked out. And the chili is done. I cooked up some cornbread while this was simmering on the stove, so we had that along with our chili. And there we have another nice warm soup for these winter months, which we have been so into lately because it's been so cold. And that's it for another week of Pantry Challenge meals. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again in the next one.